people don't know how much work that goes into the trainer role, creating.
You don't want to be in front of a class and none of your data's there. They don't have any worksheets to work through, and you look suspect. Welcome to the Sustain Train podcast. I'm Xavier.
And I'm Alfred.
Today we're diving into training development and how it plays a pivotal role in the success of any SAP implementation. From identifying needs to developing engaging content, we'll explore the best practices and strategies to help your team thrive. Y'all heard us say this before, and we'll continue saying this. Training isn't just about knowledge transfer.
Right.
It's about empowering your people to embrace the change and excel in their role. So we want to talk about the initial steps when it comes to training development from a lead standpoint. So what are some of those key determining factors when it comes to training requirements?
Good question. As a lead trainer coming onto a project, one of the first things you want to do is understand the timeline, the milestones of the project.
Right.
When is UAT? When is day in the life? When is go live? That way, the end goal, the end time. You can reverse engineer that thing to understand how you want to build out your training milestones, which is a subset of the grand milestones of the project, right? That way you can say, all right, if go live is this date, I'm going to train the previous 4 or 5 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, right? Before that, I'm going to need a couple weeks of training content creation. Before that, I'm going to need some prep time to understand the requirements, the modules, meet with the functional consultants and all things of that nature, right?
Yep.
So leading up to the next thing, of course, you want to just get your independent learnings, go into the shared drive, right? Understand that, there's going to be a lot more to it than what you think. You may have seen some things on your last project and, some of them things may apply to this next one, some may not.
Right.
So you want to understand the modules. You understand the modules that are being rolled out, where there's going to be sales and distribution, where there's going to be EWM, production planning, plant maintenance. You want to know what is this customer rolling out. Mm-hmm. You also want to know the number of sites. How many end users are you training?
Yeah.
These are very important things. Where are these users located? Right? You may miss some details if you don't ask all the right questions.
Bingo.
And then also you want to see if you can get a dedicated client, a dedicated environment for training.
Right.
Which is super convenient, knowing that nobody else is going to be using up your data sets. People don't know how much work that goes into the trainer role, creating training exercises, data sets in the system. It's a lot of work that go into it, especially if a customer doesn't have some type of tool to help automate this for you.
Exactly.
Right. That definitely helps when they do, but most of the times that's not the case. You're in there creating POs, creating inbound deliveries, distributing those to EWM, and processing those inbound deliveries from there. It's a lot that goes into it, and that's just a receiving, an inbound example, right? But there's a lot that goes into it on the back end, creating those data sets.
Yeah, most definitely.
And you don't want to have a tester in there using up your data sets because y'all in the same environment. To my point is you want to be confident when you show up for training that your end users are going to get the experience they need. And you're not going to be sitting up there looking crazy because the data that you created, you spent all night or all week creating for them to utilize is now used up.
Yeah.
And then you're having to create some data on the fly, which is taking up half of the training time, just to get them through that process. It can be a nightmare. But as far as anything else, I think, Xavier, you have some things you want to share as well, right?
Yeah, but I'll expound on that dedicated client, because we've been there, we've done that, and it's easy to step on the other person's toes. If everybody's using the same environment, you're going to lose data. You lose the integrity of the data. So just keeping it separate in that separate training client, in that separate environment, just allows things to flow a whole lot smoother. You don't want to be in front of a class and none of your data's there. They don't have any worksheets to work through, and you look suspect, in a classroom setting. So some other things I'll add to that is you want to identify is their legacy system being integrated.
Right.
Now, 9 times out of 10, some clients will be moving directly from a legacy to S4HANA, but some may want to keep certain aspects of their legacy system in place. Mm-hmm. So you want to identify those things, because you would hate to build out an entire training program thinking that this client is transitioning everything over to S4, only to find out that, oh no, we're leaving this portion in our legacy system.
Right.
So I'll give y'all an example. There may be a client that is handling everything from a delivery standpoint, from sales order management to processing deliveries to pick, pack, and ship. Cool. All right. You understand that from a lead trainer standpoint. However, they say, well, our invoicing, we don't want to move that over. That's too much of a heavy lift. So we're going to keep that in our legacy system. Mm-hmm. Well, that means their credits, their debits, all of that is still in their legacy system. So you want to adjust your training development for that, versus just assuming that, oh, we're just moving everything over to S4. Mm-hmm. In addition, just see if there's any training that may overlap between modules. If they're streamlining their business processes already from that legacy system, there may be an opportunity to combine multiple aspects of 2 modules into one. I wouldn't say that there can be any more than that, but take it as an example of, for instance, that they streamlined the sales order process or the order management process, right? To where that's still going to drive MRP and production planning and things like that. But the production planning side has been streamlined as well. Mm-hmm. You may be able to utilize one trainer for multiple modules, right? Because they're transitioning to each other, and they've already narrowed down the business functionality from an SD standpoint and a production planning standpoint. So at the end of the day, you're saving yourself time, and you're helping the customer out by consolidating a role that can be consolidated, right. Versus segmenting it when you don't necessarily have to. Because at the end of the day, we have our client's best interest at heart. Mm-hmm. Some may not, but we do.
Exactly.
That's just what it boils down to. On top of that, identify if they're going to use any simulation tools like Enable Now, Skillful, things like that. Right. If they're not going to use those, or they haven't thought about it, because a lot of the times they don't know what to ask. They don't know what they don't know. But as a lead trainer, you've been there, you've done that. You know that these simulations are going to help with frontline workers and the end users' retention rate, how much they learn, how much they retain. So it's on you to make those recommendations. You're the consultant, right? So you can recommend Enable Now, you can recommend Skillful, and build out those simulations that's just going to increase the end user retention at the end of the day. That's pretty much all I had on that topic.
Man, that is great advice. I agree. Those simulation platforms like a Skillful, they can provide a lot more optimization for the learning experience of those end users, and not just leading up to go live, but that can be your sustainment piece for post go live.
Exactly.
When the client is ready to, bring on new hires or so forth. In warehouses, a lot of time, it just is what it is. There's a lot of turnover, right? Yeah. And so you're going to want to bring in those new hires, give them the right onboarding experience by utilizing a simulation platform, right? Let them get in the computer system and learn their job. They'll get a foundational learning on that role, and then put them out on the floor and, train with another person, on the job training. And then they can go on from there. And there's always an opportunity to come back and refresh your training if you have that in place and have somebody to, manage that, that simulation platform going forward.
Is your organization still using ECC?
And if so, why are you still using ECC? You know that deadline's approaching, and SAP is not playing. They are not going to support you. That's why we want to tell you more about Pathways, your roadmap to sustainment. Change management, check. Training development, check. Training facilitation, check. Hypercare support, check. Sustainment, check.
Contact Altech Consulting today. We don't just train,
we sustain.
Yeah.
So we just discussed from a training lead standpoint how they should approach coming onto a new project. let's go ahead and transition over to a training developer.
Right.
How should a training developer come onto a project, and what should they expect to, know and learn?
Well, as a training developer, you initially want to identify the stakeholders, right? So that's going to be, your leadership team, your supply chain manager, or supply chain director, people like that, right? Because they have the vision in place. They know where they're trying to go with this digital transformation. They know what their goals are. And by you speaking with them and identifying them and building a relationship with them, you're actually able to help them on their path to attaining that goal. Without that, how do you know where they're going? In addition, you want to identify the project sponsor. So that can be the change management lead or the business lead, project manager, things like that. They can help you understand the readiness of the end users and the people that are involved in the project of the transformation. They know how ready they are, if there's already buy-in and things like that. But they can also assist you in garnering that buy-in to help your training kind of go smoothly. In addition, your functional leads, so that's going to be, again, that could be a business lead as well, but that's going to be more of your supply chain, your customer service manager, your production manager, your warehouse manager. That relationship is going to allow you to speak directly to that end user. They already have the end user's best interest at heart, you would hope, right? But they've already built a relationship with those end users. So it's easy for you to transition to building that same relationship. In addition to that, always have a strong relationship with the IT team and the technical team, of course, because that's how you're able to identify if there are any bugs in the system. Like we've already mentioned having a dedicated environment that we're training in, right? Well, a lot of the times that training environment is mirroring the live environment, right? Because they're building that out simultaneously. Some things, if it's not working in a training environment, I guarantee you it's not going to be working in a live environment. So you want to keep those communication lines open, because there may be some things that you are identifying as you're building out data sets to train your end users that the functionality isn't there. And you bring that to their attention. Oh, okay, we can make those corrections. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. But you've garnered that relationship. You guys respect each other. You're not there to compete with them. Y'all are there to work together and for the benefit of the entire company, right? Right. So definitely make sure you foster those relationships. And anytime you go to IT, go with a resolution. Don't just go with the problem. I've been on many projects and I personally haven't made the mistake. I always try to provide a resolution and then bring the problem as well. Right. But you don't just go to IT and say, hey man, this ain't working. What are y'all doing?
Provide some information.
Provide some information, provide a resolution that you've already thought through and allow them to take it further. But going that way and just say, hey, this isn't working. Yeah, you're putting yourself in a bad spot, man. So don't do that. And the last but not least is something I like to call job function relay. If you don't know what those end users are doing on a daily basis, how can you build out your training program? You can't. So sit with those end users, sit with that customer service rep, watch their day-to-day processes, ask questions. Sit with that production worker, sit with that warehouse worker, go mirror them, shadow them. Don't hover over them, like a principal in a assembly, but actually spend some time with them, ask them personal questions in addition to what, their ways of working. Because what you're doing is you're learning their process, so you know how to map that out within SAP and intertwine those business processes with the SAP process. But you're also building a relationship with those end users from the beginning before training even starts. Right. We are end user advocates. So we always approach the people first. We want those relationships with the people first, because just like we know change management is often overlooked, you already have their buy-in. Training is not starting for another 2-3 weeks. But guess what? I've already built a relationship with multiple end users. So when it's time for me to facilitate, and they come into that classroom, Hey, what's up, Alfred? What's up, Xavier? All right, let's get to it.
Right.
You know?
You already built that relationship.
Exactly, man.
Man. You preaching, boy. You preaching.
Hey, I'm trying, man. I'm trying.
You preaching. I love it. So you talked about, just having that relationship with IT, the functional consultants and so forth. You definitely want to build that relationship. As you said, catching those bugs ahead of time,
Man.
they really appreciate that.
Right.
Because you would expect, they're gonna catch this at some point when testing
Eventually.
starts. They're gonna come across this, but that may not be the case. You could have potentially saved, a bug from not getting into the production system at some point because you were being proactive when you came across it. Being able to identify that, having the experience to even identify that that's the issue, right? Just shows that you're bringing value to the project team. And, everybody can appreciate somebody that can bring value, right?
Yeah, for sure.
As a training developer, it's just about setting everything up for the training facilitator. You may be the developer and a facilitator for the module that you're building this training out for.
Exactly.
But you're either going to make this easier for yourself as a facilitator or for somebody else that's facilitating. So just understanding all the aspects of the processes in the system. How's this customer, going along this process? How's it different from previous customers that I've seen?
Yep.
Just trying to navigate the nuances, right, on your own independently.
Yeah.
Don't just go to IT at first. Kind of like what you were saying earlier, come with a resolution. That's just being prepared altogether, showing that you know the system, you're an expert at it. You're expected to be an expert because you're getting paid to be on this project,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
This is your time to shine, really. Go on the shared drive, get your independent learning. You want to learn as much as you can. Read the functional spec documents, read the process documents, look at the layout of the warehouse. If you're, I always talk about warehouses because, that's my area, EWM, as I always say.
Yeah.
But if they have a document on there that explains how the warehouse is mapped out, you get a visual, learn that. Understand some of the key players on the project, all those good things. Once you've learned as much as you can about the role that you're going to be training, then you go and set up some time with the functional consultants.
Yeah.
Tell them, hey, I've been reading the documents that you prepared. I understand this, and that. Now I want to schedule some time with you so I can go through and you teach me the end-to-end processes, kind of fill in some of these gaps, these questions that I have for you. I need some answers to those and help me understand this. And so after you go through understanding the full end-to-end processes, it's almost time to start building out your training documentation. But before you do that, you want to test.
Man.
Test the processes. Don't leave any assumptions out there. You want to understand end to end, showing that the differences, the nuances of this process for this customer in SAP. That way you can point some things out. If they're using a legacy system, like Xavier said earlier, you can put some of those things into the training documentation, so keep some of those things in mind so that you can be more relatable in the content that you're building out. That's what I got to say about that, man.
Man, that's dope because you have to test the processes.
Right.
If you're not testing them and you jump into a classroom and the process is not working, that's on you. So test. Double check your work, basically.
Right.
And make sure it's working before you even begin any training or even setting up. You should be doing that from the hotel or from home, before you even step on site. And then, another topic surrounding planning is site-specific training.
Right.
Like a lot of people don't think about it, and it may not even be on their radar. But you and I both know that it's essential, right?
Right.
But why? Explain to the people why we know and why we feel it's essential.
Man, I'll start with this. On some projects, we may call it localization or requirement gathering, whatever you may want to call it. You need your trainers at the table up front, especially if there's a customer rolling out multiple sites. There can be some differences between site to site. And so you want to be able to have someone at the table, like a trainer, expert, that can ask the right questions, that's thinking from the end user standpoint. that knows from previous experiences that, hey, this may be valid. Did you think about this? Did you think about that? For instance, there could be a geographical location from difference from one site to the next.
Yep.
Could be some language differences. You know, even across the U.S., not even just across the world. You can go to the West Coast or to Texas, then you have more Hispanics. You know, Spanish speaking people and employees that may or may not know English. So you want to understand some of these differences. Maybe you got to bring in a translator. Mm-hmm. You need to know these things up front. You don't want to be reactive. You want to be proactive. That's why you got to know the right questions to ask.
Bingo.
Right?
Yeah.
That way you can go ahead and plan to bring in a translator if you can't find a consultant that's, multilingual, just be prepared. You want to know these things. You want to put solutions in place for the client so that we're not scrambling at the last minute to get resources, right? Also, just some of the internal differences from site to site as far as technology. One site may use a lot of automation. They may have conveyors throughout the whole building. They may have robots, what have you. A lot of automation can be at one site, and then you go to their next location and they have none of that same automation.
Right.
Maybe they have mostly human labor, manual workers completing all these same tasks. And so then you got to kind of switch your content up, your work instructions to match these different locations. You may not be able to use the same work instruction from the previous site. So that's just something you want to be prepared for, something you want to know and be able to pivot. Also, one thing that I've seen is like some sites may have an annex location. Maybe you have a main warehouse, then you have an off-site 3PL type of location. Yeah. And you want to know if you do have a 3PL partner, are they using SAP as well? Are we going to implement this with them? Because then you want to understand, if not, how are they going to control the inventory remotely, virtually? This can be a bad situation to be in.
Exactly.
If you don't have a proven process in place that's going to help you keep up with your inventory in a location that you're virtually managing.
Right.
How are you going to receive in your orders? How are you going to ship from there and also know exactly what's being moved around in your inventory? So that's something you want to think about. Make sure that your content is clear so that whoever is doing those different roles in a case like that, they know exactly what they're doing and stuff is not getting missed in translation. Inventory is not getting out of whack because no one wants to continuously do wall-to-wall inventory counts,
not at all,
throughout the year more than they already have to.
No.
So that's just something you want to think about. All of this, all these insights all together is going to help the training facilitation go even smoother.
Yep.
Understanding the nuances from site to site. Like you said earlier, it's definitely worth it. It's not hype behind it.
Right.
You want to know these things, ask these questions, and make sure that we have a great understanding of how these processes are going to work from one site to the next.
Yeah, definitely, man. Because when it comes to, site-specific training, as you already mentioned, there are variables regardless. You can have multiple distribution centers. You can have multiple manufacturing plants.
Yep.
Objectively, the goal is always to have standardized processes across the board. But that don't always happen.
Can't always happen.
We know that that's not going to always happen.
Right.
So although the goal is to seek standardization across the board, roles and responsibilities, they can vary from site to site. Reason being, you have a distribution center in the Midwest that has a facility that has over 20 dock doors. It's 100,000 to 250,000 square feet. But then you have an operation on the West Coast that operates from a much smaller warehouse operation and has 2 to 3 dock doors.
Right.
Well, the customer service team in the Midwest with a huge operation, they may specifically focus on order management. Once we create this delivery, we're handing that off to the warehouse. And that's where EWM takes over with the pick, packing, and shipping. Well, on the West Coast, customer service will probably be doing order management, let me go ahead and create this delivery. I'm going to assign it to the door. I'm going to do everything associated that typically this other operation was doing in the Midwest, but now I'm wearing multiple hats.
Right.
So your customer service manager, so to speak, may be handling the order management at the smaller location, but it might also be handling production planning, confirming orders, and things of that nature. So you have to approach each situation separately. They're all unique opportunities. And if you don't, take the actual geographical location into account, you're going to miss out on certain things, because you have to look at, can this smaller facility even accommodate a 53-foot trailer?
Right.
They can only have a 48-foot container come in, or something even smaller. It may have to be a live load versus a drop.
Right.
But the Midwest location that has over 20 dock doors, they don't have that issue. So training your load mapping process is going to be completely different. I can't train this West Coast operation on load mapping for 20 different trucks when it's 2 trucks.
Right.
And vice versa. It doesn't make any sense. So that's why it's important when it comes to site-specific training. And again, we know that we want to keep things standardized across the board, but a lot of the times that can't happen because you're going to have to cater your training program to specific locations, whether they're being rolled out at the same time or segmented out. It's still going to change from site to site. And you just have to be prepared for that. Like Alfred mentioned, always be proactive versus being reactive. We're not going to get anywhere if we're just proactive all the time. You know?
For sure. We've seen some of that recently at a conference where a guy was trying to brag about what he was doing for his clients, right? But as we started to listen a little closer and closer, he was talking about being reactive to a lot of things.
Yeah, completely reactive.
Because maybe some things wasn't a priority for him, for his customers, right? Or his company for their customers. And that's not really a good look. You don't want to brag about how you were reactive on a lot of situations.
Right.
You feel like you resolved certain problems.
You did something well. No.
When these things could have been, thought about up front if you asked the right questions. Should have been thought about
up front, yeah.
So understanding that there are differences from site to site, you want to ask all the right questions, even if you have a template in place, and build that out from there. That, these are the 20 questions I must ask, right? And think of more along the way that's going to help you navigate through these nuances of these sites and their different locations across their platform.
Yeah, I like that. 20 questions that you ask, and then come with another 20 that they didn't ask.
Right.
Because a lot of the times, it's no fault of their own, but they don't know what questions to ask. Right. But if, like we mentioned, the guy you mentioned, if he was proactive, he would have already asked those questions up front. It's not a pat on the back or a badge of honor to say, yeah, I reacted and we fixed that.
Yeah.
Well, you really didn't have to if you would have asked that question up front,
Right.
So that's where we're at with it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Man, it's another great episode.
Yes, sir.
Touching on training development. Some of the key things we touched on are how should a training lead come to a project? How should they jump on and take the reins as they come onto a new project? Then we'll discuss how should a training developer, approach a new project? What's some of the things they should know?
Yep.
How should they build out their relationships with the IT consultants, the technical consultants, the project manager and sponsor? What should they be doing to get things ahead on their side so that training facilitation can run smoothly?
Right.
Then we talked about some of the differences from site to site specifics that you're going to have questions that need answers so that you can build out your training content correctly. You want to make sure your work instructions, your quick reference guides, your simulations, everything is very clear for your end users, because they're going to need this information and they're going to be learning this for their new system. And you want them to be successful, right? So be thoughtful, be courageous. Don't think that a question is dumb. Ask them all, because you don't want to have any assumptions that can lead to a disaster later on, leave gaps for these trainers, because when that facilitator goes on, and it could be you to train these folks, you're going to be looking crazy if you didn't ask some of them questions, and some things you don't know. And that training facilitator, is dependent on you if, there's a siloed approach to it. That training developer is dependent on you. That training facilitator is dependent on you for that content. Then you want to make sure that it's correct.
Yeah.
So, man, you got to think these things out. So, again, thank you all for joining on this episode. We appreciate you all. If you got this far, we rocking with you.
Keep rocking.
You. Yes, sir. So thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, stay inspired, stay empowered, and stay on track with Sustain Train.